Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1348. Not by choice, obviously. Time travel isn't a button. It's a betrayal. Your eyes open to a ceiling made of damp wood beams, darkened by centuries of smoke and the quiet suffering of generations. There's no electricity, no soft linen, just the heavy breath of cold air clinging to your skin like a wet animal. You lie on a straw mattress that has already betrayed you. It pokes, it stinks, and it crackles. Not because it's new, but because something inside is alive. Something that isn't you. Probably lice. Possibly rats. Hopefully not the neighbor's dog again. You turn your head and immediately regret it. The smell is everywhere. Not the smell of something wrong, but of something normal. Sour milk, human sweat, boiled turnips, wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint but unmistakable scent of something recently relieved. And no, that's not a metaphor. Your bladder is full, and that's the first real crisis of your new medieval life. Your first instinct is, of course, to find a bathroom. But there is no bathroom, not in the way your 21st century neurons expect. There is no tile, no sink, no milk and soap, just a wooden bucket in the corner, full, overflowing, laughing at you. You close your eyes again. Maybe this is a dream, a strange, historical escape room. Maybe if you lie very still, it will fade. It doesn't. You sit up slowly. Your back hurts. Your knees hurt. You're 32 years old, which, congratulations, means you're statistically an elder in this society. You've outlived half your village. Your reward? Chronic joint pain and nowhere to poop. You reach for your shoes, wooden clogs. They're cold, stiff, and stained with something you hope is mud. There are no socks. Socks haven't been invented yet. Or maybe they have, but not for you. You're not nobility. You're not even middle class. You're available for plowing. Outside the door, which doesn't quite close, the world coughs. Not people, the world. The fog presses in like an accusation, thick and wet, wrapping around the thatch roofs and skeletal trees. The village is still asleep, or pretending to be. Fires smolder. Chickens wander. Somewhere, a baby is crying. Somewhere else, someone is already dying. And you just need to go. But there's no plumbing, no pipes, no flush, just a wooden plank above a pit. If you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll be walking to the field, crouching near the hedge, hoping the frost doesn't bite more than your dignity. And if someone sees you, too bad. Shame is a luxury. Privacy is a sin. You're part of nature now, a leaking, shivering, sentient part of the food chain. You step outside. Your breath comes out in clouds. Your teeth ache from a cold. And somewhere, deep in the mud-soaked earth beneath your feet, the medieval soil begins to whisper. Welcome back. We missed your waste. And that, my dear night traveler, is where our journey begins. In the mud, in the filth, in the quiet, squatting terror of human history. Because if you think the worst thing about the Middle Ages was war, plague, or famine, you haven't tried using their toilet. Not yet, but you will. Tonight you will. Let's clear something up before you venture too far in your itchy wool tunic. Clenching your shame between your thighs, let's extinguish the most fragile illusion of your modern comfort. There is no toilet paper. There is no soft, perforated, vanilla-scented, quilted savior waiting to wipe away your sins. There is no triple ply, no recycled bamboo roll, no artisanal dispenser bolted next to a scented candle that whispers eucalyptus scent. There is you, your body, and the eternal question, now what? In 1348, wiping is not an act of cleansing. It's a negotiation with nature. And the options are creative, ingenious, if you're being generous, barbaric, if you're being honest. You reach instinctively for something, anything. And here's where your social class slaps you in the face. If you're rich, And I mean landowning, pig tax collecting rich. Perhaps you get a rag. A piece of linen, maybe. Reusable, of course. Washed weekly in cold, infected water, then hung to dry among the sheets. You will share this rag with your family, with your servants, possibly with the ghosts of everyone who died using it. If you're not rich, and let's be clear, you're not, you're using what the earth provides. Moss, leaves, bark, straw, your left hand, a small stick. Yes, a stick. It has a name. A gomp stick. A personal friend to Buddhist monks, Roman soldiers, and now, you. Smooth, curved, sometimes sharpened. Not because anyone's a sadist, but because splinters are preferable to walking around with last night's stew still hugging your thighs. If you're near a river, you might rinse. But the river is downstream from the latrine. You're essentially rubbing yourself with other people's optimism. And if it's winter, congratulations. You get to choose between frostbite or infection. You look around. The fields are silent. The trees offer no comfort. You spot a cluster of dry leaves, but they crumble in your fingers like guilt. They'll never survive the task ahead. You settle on a handful of straw. Dry, coarse. It doesn't bend, it stabs. As you prepare yourself for the medieval cleansing ritual, a gust of wind whips through the hedge. It carries with it a 1,000-year-old truth that history textbooks always forget to mention. Wiping was a war. It was a choice between pain and shame, infection and embarrassment. Some people didn't wipe, not because they were lazy, but because they couldn't afford to. And so they walked slowly, gently, with a shuffle in their step. You might have thought it was the weight of their burdens. Sometimes it was just the weight of yesterday's decisions still clinging to them. In monasteries, monks were known to use a single communal cloth called the sacramentum panni. It was passed from stall to stall, a relic of shared humility. And in cities, well, let's just say that sewer rats lived richer lives than most humans. Now, back to you. You do your best. You pray. You clench. You wipe. The straw cracks. Your skin protests. You bleed. Slightly. And you realize something deeply unsettling. You will do this again. Tomorrow. And the next day. For as long as your bowels insist on remembering. You pull up your rough wool trousers, which chafe in all the wrong places. There is no elastic waistband. No zipper, just rope and regret. You feel raw, not just physically, existentially. You miss toilet paper, not just the softness, but the dignity it represented, the privilege of privacy, the clean, quiet finality of a modern flush. But here, in the 14th century, nothing is final. Nothing is clean, and yet there is something oddly grounding in all of this. You are human. You are alive, and you're not special. The peasants of this land have walked this same shameful path every day of their lives. So did the nobles, the priests, the queens in their castles. Everyone squats. Everyone wipes. Everyone suffers. History, it turns out, is not a story of kings. It's a story of intestines. So no, there's no toilet paper. But now, you understand what that really means. And somehow, knowing that, you feel closer to the past than ever before. Let's be honest, you weren't going to use the field again. The straw betrayed you. The wind mocked you. And the faint trickle of a neighbor relieving himself behind a tree while maintaining eye contact was the final straw. You need something better. You need a structure, a room, walls. And so you ask. You mutter to a passing child with soot on his face and teeth like broken tombstones. Is there a privy? He points, wordlessly, solemnly, as if sending you to war. You walk toward the castle, or the inn, or the monastery. It doesn't matter because the toilet is always the same. Hidden, narrow, unventilated, and above all, terrifying. Down the hallway, past the pantry, past the rooms where people sleep 10 to a bed, past the kitchens where boiling cauldrons bubble with something beige and vaguely threatening. You find it. The latrine. Not a bathroom. Not a powder room. This is not the place where you check your reflection or escape an awkward dinner. This is a hole. A dark, splintered, jagged hole carved into a wooden plank suspended above nothingness. And it smells like secrets. The moment you open the door, if there is one, the scent hits you. Not the smell of something dead. That would be comforting. This is worse. This is the smell of living rot. Fermenting excrement, damp timber, stale urine, and the very concept of shame. You step inside. You try not to breathe through your nose. You fail. There is no window, no ventilation, just a faint beam of light squeezing in through a crack in the ceiling like a ghost who pities you. You sit, slowly, carefully, not because you're tired, though you are, but because the wood is slick, wet, and you're not sure why. The hole beneath you gapes like a mouth that has seen too much. You lean forward, not because you want to look, no one wants to look, but because you hear something. Scratching, tiny claws against stone, a shuffling movement, the delicate, percussive sound of a rat dragging something soft. You pray, not to God. God has better things to do, but to gravity, to luck, to your own buttocks, begging them not to betray you now. In wealthier households. And let's not kid ourselves, you're not in one. The latrine is called a garderobe. French. Fancy, but still a lie. Garderobe implies wardrobe, closet, storage, a safe place. And in a way, it is. A place to store waste. Centuries of it. A vertical shaft cut through stone, dropping your offerings into the moat, or into a pit, or into the open arms of the earth herself. And if you're in a castle, that hole opens to the outside world. You can see the sky, and it can see you. Your feces plummet from a tower like royal decrees, landing in the trench below with a sound that history forgets to mention. If you're in an inn, it's worse. A communal bench, one long plank with a row of holes. You sit beside others, shoulder to shoulder. Eye contact optional but frequent. Someone farts. Someone groans. Someone says, "Cold morning." You agree. It is cold and humiliating. This, you realize, is not just a room. It is a ritual, a confrontation with everything your body has rejected, a reckoning with your own softness. You miss the flush, that sacred modern ceremony where water washes away the past. Here, the past stays. It lingers. It accumulates. And sometimes it comes back. Insects breed. Maggots writhe. Flies hum lullabies of disease. Sometimes the hole backs up, blocked by bones or straw or superstition. You try not to vomit. You try not to fall in. People have. They slip. They lean too far forward. They trust the wood too much. They disappear. And when they are found, if they are found, they are never quite whole again. Your knees ache. Your thighs tremble. You finish. There is no paper. You know this now. So you shuffle. You wipe. You stand. There's no sink. No soap. No towel. You are unwashed. Unchanged. Except now, you carry the knowledge of what lurks below. You open the door. The air outside hits you like resurrection. The wind is cruel. The sky is gray. But the latrine is behind you. For now, you breathe. You survived. But deep in your gut, the next wave is already forming. Your stomach groans. Your intestines whisper. You will return, and the latrine will be waiting. There's a reason these walls don't speak. They've seen things, heard things, that silence was invented to forget. Things that happen when bodies are vulnerable, when nature calls and shame responds. You stare at the structure that houses the medieval toilet. It's not a room. It's a warning. And the message is clear. You do not matter. Let's begin with the material. The medieval toilet. if we may even grant it such a dignified title, was built of stone and wood. But not the kind of stone that inspires awe or sanctuary. Not cathedral stone. Not castle grandeur. Just jagged blocks of cold gray piled with resignation. The mortar is cracked. The timber is warped. The ceiling is low. Not to conserve heat, but to keep your expectations underground. This is not a room for you. It is a room against you. Take a closer look at the seat. If you're in a monastery, it's likely a long bench, hewn crudely from oak, with a series of holes. No spacing, no partitions, no privacy. Just a row of openings, evenly spaced like teeth in a smile forged by cruelty. The wood is dark, stained, and polished in all the wrong places. Not by craftsmanship, but by centuries of reluctant flesh pressing against it. The holes themselves? Not round, not smooth. Some are oval, some are jagged, some are too wide, others dangerously narrow. There was no standard, only suffering, and beneath each one, a drop, a deep, echoing void that swallows not only waste but dignity, fear, and sometimes people. In the upper echelons of society, the architecture pretends to care. Castles had their garderobes built into the outer walls, protruding structures with an opening at the bottom that released waste directly onto the castle's exterior. Yes, literally out of the wall, like spitting but worse. From the outside, they looked like decorative stone alcoves. From the inside, they were cold, wind-lashed cubicles of despair. The draft was constant, the smell lingered, and the risk, ever present. Some garderobes had vertical chutes built into the stonework, carefully engineered, not for convenience, but for containment. These shafts dropped waste into pits, moats, or, in the best case scenario, flowing water. But water was rare, flowing even more so. More often, the waste collected in cesspits, stagnant, festering, breathing organisms that waited patiently to overflow. These pits would be cleaned, eventually, by men paid in coin, pity, and permanent social exile. The floor? Uneven, sometimes damp, sometimes frozen, always threatening. Slip, and you might learn more about physics and humility than any monk ever could teach you. The walls? Carved with desperate graffiti. Yes, even here, even while squatting in anguish, humans found the time to write. Scratched prayers, crude drawings, a name etched beside a date. Proof that someone came here before you and left with slightly less of themselves. And the door, when it exists, creaks like it's telling on you. It's rarely secure. Often it's a curtain, a piece of cloth. Sometimes not even that. Because privacy, like comfort, was a sin reserved for the dead. Even the roof conspires against you. Leaks, holes, cold drafts. Rain sometimes fell into the toilet shaft, turning the waste below into a soup of historical regrets. And during winter, icicles formed around the seat. The wood stiffened, and your skin, already fragile, froze on contact. And yet, this architecture lasted. For centuries. Because no one cared enough to make it better. The church said suffering purified the soul. The nobles said it wasn't their problem. The peasants said nothing. They had no breath left to speak. So the toilet remained. A structure not designed for use, but for endurance. A place that didn't invite you in, it warned you away. But you still came. And you sat. And you stared at the wall in front of you, carved from cold stone, and you realized you are part of the design. The architecture of the medieval toilet is not just functional, it's symbolic. It was built to remind you of your place in the world. Low, unseen, disposable, flesh made temporary. You're not a person here. You are a vessel, a leaking, whimpering, shivering vessel, passing through an age that never asked how you felt about any of it. And when you leave, stepping out into the morning, legs trembling, pride in pieces, the stone doesn't crumble. The wood doesn't bend. It waits, because it knows you'll be back. Soon. Let's not pretend anymore. You thought this would be a temporary inconvenience, a rustic adventure, an embarrassing detour in your otherwise comfortable experience of time travel. But now you understand, privacy does not exist here. Not in this room, not in this century, not even in your own body. Let's take a moment and remember the last time you used a bathroom in peace. A locked door, warm light, a scroll through your phone, a moment to breathe, to reflect, to simply be. Forget it. Now, in the year 1348, your body is public domain. Your bathroom is communal. Your presence is audible. Your movements are visible. And your shame? Shared. If you're in a monastery, your toilet, the rear door, is a long wooden bench with evenly spaced holes. No stalls, no walls, no doors. Just a cold row of monks hunched in silence, robes lifted, souls emptied. You sit among them, shoulder to shoulder with Brother Matthew, whose digestion is particularly enthusiastic. He nods at you solemnly, as if greeting a fellow soldier on the battlefield. You nod back. You dare not speak. Conversation is forbidden, though farting is not. You clear your throat. Too loud. A monk glares at you, mid-wipe, with the indignation of a man who gave up wine, sex, and sleep, but not judgment. In the castle, it's no better. The garderobe might offer a small room, a wooden bench, and a hole in the wall, but the door doesn't lock. If there is one, it creaks open without warning. A servant might wander in, eyes averted, pretending not to see your knees trembling like reeds in a storm. Even queens, draped in velvet and crushed by corsets, were not spared. Their private chambers included attendants, ladies in waiting, and sometimes entire audiences. The act of relieving oneself was so frequent, so unavoidable, that it was simply folded into daily life. A royal might excuse herself during a meeting and retreat behind a screen, 2 feet away, to squat over a portable commode, while the council continued discussing matters of state. There was no privacy, only proximity. And a village? A nightmare of closeness. Houses pressed together like teeth in a clenched jaw. Families of 10 crammed into one room. No separate bathroom. Just a chamber pot under the bed, used in full view. A child peeing in the corner while his parents argue. A grandmother crouched behind the stove, skirt lifted, hoping for dignity in the steam. At night, if the pot is full, and it often is, someone must carry it outside, through the streets, past neighbors, past whispers, and dump it out the window with a shout. Gardes low, watch out for the water. A phrase so common in medieval cities that it became reflex. You didn't walk under windows. You didn't trust balconies. The sky was not your friend. It rained waste. From above. From everyone. And yet, no one flinched. Because it wasn't just your waste. It was everyone's. This lack of privacy wasn't a flaw. It was a design. The medieval world didn't carve out space for solitude. Your body was never yours alone. It belonged to the church, to the village, to the weather. You were born in a crowded room. You ate in one. You slept in one. You defecated in one. And when you die, your body will be washed in the same communal basin as the one used for laundry, childbirth, and occasionally soaking vegetables. Even the animals watched. Chickens wandered through doorways. Pigs rooted near the latrines. Dogs sniffed beneath your feet mid-squat, tail wagging, waiting for something warm to eat. Yes, you read that right. Sometimes the dogs ate it, because waste was food, because food was scarce, because nature doesn't care about your moral discomfort. There are no secrets, no sacred spaces, just flesh, noise, and necessity. And yet people survived. They made jokes. They told stories. They farted with pride. Children played near the cesspits. Lovers whispered beside chamber pots. Life carried on, loud, leaky, and shameless. You, on the other hand, are unraveling. You miss walls, locks, the tiny dignity of being alone. But this is the Middle Ages, and solitude is not a right, it's a fantasy. So you squat, you listen, you hope no one is watching. Someone always is. The world here is small. The walls are thin. The smell travels. The sounds echo. There is no privacy, only patience. And when you finally finish, pants ask you, eyes darting, soul bruised, you don't feel clean. You feel seen, too seen. You step out, and life resumes. Children laugh. Vendors shout. Someone sneezes. But in your bones, in your spine, in the quiet corners of your mind, something is broken now. You understand what it means to live in a world where your most human acts are never hidden. And you can never unknow that feeling. You thought you were safe once you left the latrine. You breathed the outside air. You walked away from a hole in the stone, the stained wood, the moaning pit beneath you. You believed that smell belonged to that room, that hell had boundaries. You were wrong, because in the 14th century, smell travels. And it does not knock. It seeps, slowly, confidently, like a king who knows no one will stop him. The stench does not live in the toilet. It uses the toilet as a door. And once it escapes, it becomes a ghost. It clings to wool, to hair, to skin. It settles in rafters, in floorboards, in prayer books. It climbs walls, then noses. It floats through windows, settles in pillows, infects dreams. You wake at night to the scent of someone else's shame. Not metaphorically. You literally smell your neighbor's digestion as it decomposes in the floor below. Because the medieval garderobe wasn't sealed. It wasn't flushed. It wasn't even finished. It was a hole. And holes don't contain things. They invite them upward. If you live in a castle, the latrines are built into the outer walls, yes. But many also drop into internal pits, deep, stone-lined vaults beneath the structure, where waste collects like forgotten promises. And because warmth rises and air finds its way, the smell does too. Through the shaft, through the cracks, through your floor, and into your life. Imagine waking from a fevered sleep beneath a heavy wool blanket, already sweating, and then you smell it. A sour, thick aroma, heavy as soup, sharp as vinegar, but darker. It's the smell of human rot, not yet rotted, and it's rising. You shift in bed. You pull the blanket tighter, as if fabric could protect you from what has no form. The smell is not just in your nose, it's in your throat, your lungs, your memory. You remember what you ate, and what it became, and how it still lives below. This is not just disgusting. It's eternal, because nothing ever really goes away in this world. Not sound, not pain, not waste. The same smell rises in the chapel, in the kitchen, in the nursery. It perfumes weddings and funerals alike. It mingles with incense. It survives fires. It outlasts names. In monasteries, the latrines were sometimes located directly beneath the dormitories. A convenience, they said, a blessing. But there is no such thing as a blessing in a room where 20 men sleep above a river of feces. They snore, they dream, and they inhale it, night after night, like a slow, religious suffocation. And during summer, the heat stirs it, awakens it. The sun turns the cesspits into alchemical vats, bubbling with curses. The scent grows sweet, not in the way honey is sweet, but in the way infection is sweet. Sickly, fermented, medicinal, if medicine hated you. It sticks to you. You bathe, rarely, but it returns. Not because you're unclean, but because the air itself is compromised. The walls have absorbed it. The timber exhales it back. You are living inside the memory of 1,000 unwashed mornings. Even nature conspires. Rats scurry through the tunnels of waste and crawl into kitchens. They carry the smell in their fur. Flies land on waste, then on your bread. The cycle is not just biological, it's social. You live with your waste. You share a home with it. You may as well name it. People try to mask it. Herbs hung from rafters. Rose petals scattered on floors. Lavender placed in shoes. But it's never enough. The rot wins. You wonder how anyone can eat. They do. You watch as soup is ladled, as bread is broken, as hands that just wiped, hands that never washed, pass food, touch faces, bless children. Because you get used to it. Eventually, the smell becomes a constant, like background music. Like suffering. It becomes part of life. Part of you. But for now, fresh, modern, soft, and horrified, you notice it. You notice every molecule of it. And it notices you back. It wraps around you like a question. What did you expect? You entered history. You asked to see it. And now it's breathing in your ear. Because in the Middle Ages, rot is not an end. It's a beginning. A scent that says, you're alive. For now. Let us begin with a name. Gong Farmer. A title that sounds vaguely whimsical. As if he tilled the fields with bells or collected echoes at dawn. But no, gong was the polite word for human waste. And a farmer, in this context, did not harvest crops. He harvested excrement. Yours. Mine. Everyone's. His was a trade of shadows, silence, and stench. And tonight, he arrives. You hear him before you see him. Boots squelching through damp straw, the creak of leather straps, the dull clang of a metal pail scraping stone. He hums a tune with no melody. Not out of joy, but survival. Because if you don't hum while standing knee-deep in a cesspit, you begin to listen. And listening is dangerous. He wears a coat of thick canvas soaked through. His gloves, if he has any, are barely holding together. His face is wrapped in cloth, not for modesty, but defense. A barrier against the miasma, against the thing that rises not just from below, but inside. The Gong Farmer works at night. Always at night. Not because the work is easier. It isn't. But because no one wants to see him. By law, he may not walk through the streets during the day. His body offends the daylight. His job is a nocturnal crime of necessity. He is paid well by medieval standards because no one else will do what he does. He approaches the pit with reverence. Not reverence for what's inside, but for the risk. Because this is not just filth, it is danger. Cesspit were deep, sometimes 10, 15 feet. The waste fermented, producing methane. The air was thick, toxic, and explosive. One wrong step, one careless lantern, and the entire pit could erupt, launching centuries of royal regret into the sky. But someone has to climb in. So he does. He lowers himself into the darkness, bucket by bucket, shoveling what the rest of the world dares not look at. The substance is not consistent. Sometimes it's liquid, sometimes sludge, sometimes a tangled mat of straw, bones, and secrets. He moves slowly, methodically, as if touching something sacred. Not out of respect, but because haste here means death. He has seen it happen. A young assistant once slipped, gone in seconds. The pit swallowed him. No scream, just bubbles. The Gong Farmer kept working, because the job was not done. This man, this quiet, nameless figure in the night, is the reason castles don't drown. He is the unsung architect of survival. He finishes his work. He drags the buckets to his cart. He hauls them out of the city to the edge of the fields where the waste is dumped and, paradoxically, turned into fertilizer. Yes, the food you eat tomorrow will grow from the waste you left behind today. Life is circular here. Beautifully, grotesquely circular. The Gong Farmer does not speak much. If you greet him, he nods. If you offer thanks, he shrugs. His eyes are tired, his hands calloused, his soul quiet. Some say he is cursed. Some say his children are born with no noses. Others say he is holy, a penitent saint, absorbing the filth of the world so others may stay clean. None of that matters to him. He returns home before dawn. He strips his clothes outside. He washes with vinegar and ash. His wife sleeps in another room. His children call him sir, not out of respect, but distance. He dreams of fresh air. He rarely gets it, but tomorrow he will return, because the pit always fills again. The castles continue to eat, and the waste must go somewhere. He is not a hero. He is a system, a function, a necessary man in an unnecessary world. And as you lie in bed tonight, warm, full, clean, remember him, because someone had to carry away the worst parts of your existence. And for a few silver coins, he did. Let's not be dramatic, or rather, let's be precisely as dramatic as your intestines demand. Because now that you've lived in the Middle Ages for a few days, eaten the bread, drunk the water, wiped with the straw, it's time to accept this simple, undeniable truth. You have worms. No, not a few. Not one polite, curious worm sipping tea in your colon. You have a community, an ecosystem, a godless carnival of creatures that entered you without asking and refused to pay rent. Congratulations. You're a host. It starts, innocently enough, with your morning bread. Coarse, gray, and dense as medieval regret. That bread was baked by hands that last washed themselves. Never. The flour was stored in sacks beside the latrine. Rats scurry through it. Fleas nap in it. You chew slowly because sometimes the grains crunch back. The eggs you had, unwashed, warm from a hen that sleeps in the same room as your cousins. The meat, spoiled, drenched in vinegar to hide the smell. Half cooked over a fire that never quite decides whether it's smoke or flame. And then the water. Let's talk about the water. It comes from a well, or a barrel, or a stream that also happens to be where people wash, urinate, toss dead fish, and dump the contents of their chamber pots. The idea of boiling water is reserved for the rich or for witchcraft accusations. So you drink it raw, because you're thirsty, because ale is expensive, because you're tired. And that's all the invitation your worms need. They arrive quietly, hitching rides on a cabbage leaf, hiding in a slice of sheep's stomach, or simply pass from hand to mouth during an innocent moment of scratching. At first, they do nothing. They settle in. They explore. They burrow gently into the lining of your intestines, like polite guests fluffing the pillows before bedtime. Then the fun begins. You start to feel bloated, but not full. Hungry constantly, but somehow still thin. Your belly gurgles like it's learning a new language. Your sleep becomes restless. You scratch at night. Your stool, if we dare call it that, looks strange. Too pale, too dark, too lively. And sometimes, in the darkness of the garderobe, you feel it. Movement, a twitch, a slide, a tiny celebration of life happening just beneath the surface. Roundworms, tapeworms, pinworms, hookworms, flukes. They have names. They have jobs. Some eat what you eat, robbing you of nutrients. Others burrow into your tissues, laying eggs in places that should never be egged. A few reach for glory, growing feet in length, twisting through your bowels like ribbons of medieval irony. And then there's the exit, because eventually they must come out. In your stool, in your vomit, in your mouth, if you're terribly unlucky. A thin, white worm slithering out of a child's nose, normal. A ribbon coiled in the privy, mistaken for string, ordinary. A man screaming because he felt something move inside his eye. Tragic but unsurprising. Doctors, and here I use the term loosely, have treatments. They recommend garlic, salt, starvation. Some advise swallowing live frogs to scare the worms away. Others suggest red-hot pokers or trepanning, drilling holes in the skull to release the demons. It does not help, but it's impressive. Still others apply leeches to the abdomen, hoping the worms will flee the area like guests avoiding an awkward dinner party. You try everything. You eat bitter herbs. You pray. You sleep upside down. Nothing works, because the worms don't fear you. They've always been here. This is not an infection. It's a condition of being alive in the 14th century. Every peasant has them. So do most nobles. Children are born with them. Monks fast with them. Kings die with them. Some say the worms are part of God's plan, a reminder of humility. Others believe they're demons. You just want to stop itching, but it won't stop. You scratch at night. You sweat. You dream of writhing forests. You wake up hungrier than ever, because the worms are thriving. They're your legacy now, and as you squat in the cold, above a hole that echoes with other people's secrets, you come to terms with something that no textbook ever told you. You're not one body. You are many. You wake before dawn, groaning, bloated, sweating under layers of wool and sin. Not from illness, you already have that. Not from worms, they're permanent now, but from something deeper. A pressure. Your belly is taut. Your intestines are curled into knots. Something inside wants out. And yet, you stay still. Because today is not a day for weakness. Today is a day for God. The monastery bells ring. Their sound is hollow, echoing across stone like a judgment passed without trial. You are a novice here, cloaked in coarse brown robes, hair shaved in a halo of obedience, lips stitched shut by the weight of prayer. You rise with the others, single file, silent, and you feel it, the urge, not lust, not rage, not gluttony, but something more shameful. You need to relieve yourself, but you can't. You mustn't, because in this sacred place, to heed the call of your body before the call of the Lord is not just impolite. It is impure. It is the flesh asserting itself, and the flesh, in the eyes of your superiors, is the enemy. Monastic life in the 14th century is not built for comfort. It is built for submission, to silence, to hunger, to pain, to the denial of everything that makes you human. You file into the chapel, stomach churning. The stone floor beneath your sandals is freezing. Your feet are wet from yesterday, or the day before. No one remembers. Time here is not counted in hours, but in prayers and restraint. The service begins. Psalms echo in Latin, chanted with rhythmic misery. You recite with them, voice trembling, but the pressure builds. It claws upward. You shift your weight, pretending to adjust your robe. Your bowels groan like a storm held behind a dam made of shame. You clench. Harder. Beside you, Brother Anselm stands immobile, a statue carved from suffering. He has not moved in 2 hours. He has not relieved himself since Monday. It is now Thursday. He is a saint in the making. You are sweating. The monks believe that indulgence in any bodily function too easily, too freely, too joyfully invites sin. Even the act of emptying oneself should be done with hesitation, with sorrow, with sacrifice. In some orders, monks relieve themselves only once a day, not because they didn't feel the urge, but because they were trained to rise above it. They believe the body must be tamed like a beast, fed sparingly, washed rarely, listened to never. Some even carried tiny whips, disciplinas, to punish themselves for impure thoughts or impure urges. Imagine that, flagellating yourself for the crime of needing to defecate. You try to think of something else, but it's impossible because the body speaks louder than the soul, especially when the soul is hungry, sleepless, and constipated. And the worst part? You don't even know where to go when the service ends. Because the latrine, the monastery's rear door, is a communal bench. No doors, no partitions, just a long, open wooden seat hanging above a trench that stinks like theology gone wrong. There is no privacy here, and even there, you're watched. Not by the monks, not even by the rats, but by your own guilt. You imagine Saint Benedict himself, frowning down at you from some celestial cloister, whispering, if you're truly holy, you wouldn't need to go at all. There are stories, whispered, never written, of monks who fasted until they didn't defecate for weeks. Their skin turned gray, their minds bright with visions, their intestines stone. This was seen as devotion. You, on the other hand, just want 5 minutes alone. But that is not possible. Not here. So you hold it. You sit in the scriptorium for hours, copying scripture with a trembling quill, each Latin letter blurred by sweat. Your fingers cramp. Your belly cramps more. When the pain becomes unbearable, you pray. Not for salvation, not for peace, but for release. You whisper, forgive me, Lord. I must go. And finally, you walk toward the latrine, head bowed, feet light, as if hoping God won't notice your retreat. But he notices. He always notices. And somewhere, in a chamber of eternal silence, he sighs. Because you gave in. Because you listened to the body. Because you were human. Let's indulge a fantasy. Picture a medieval king, draped in ermine, crown heavy with stolen gold, reclining on a throne of carved oak beside a roaring fire, as minstrels strum lutes and servants pour wine from silver pitchers. Now imagine him needing to poop. Still majestic? You shouldn't be, because behind every royal decree, every war declared, every sentence of exile or beheading, there was a pause, a stomach gurgle, a frown, and the inevitable, where's the chamber pot? Let's be very clear. There was no such thing as a royal flush. There was a royal chamber, yes, a room, sometimes velvet draped, sometimes tucked behind screen. But the toilet, it was a commode, a glorified box with a hole in it, lined with cloth and often filled with pungent herbs in a desperate attempt to wage war against the inevitable. The king sat, bare-bottomed, over a bowl of his own undoing. A servant waited nearby, respectfully turned, of course, but present, just in case His Majesty needed help with a wiping. This was normal, expected. Royalty was not about privacy. It was about performance. Even while defecating, some nobles had what was called a close stool, a fancy, padded wooden chair with a hole in the seat and a chamber pot beneath. The upholstery might be red velvet, gold-trimmed, embroidered with unicorns, but under the cushion, still poop. And once the act was complete, another servant would remove the pot with a bow, because to serve the king meant serving every part of him, even the parts that squelched. In the French court, there existed a position of great esteem. The groom of the stool. Yes, that was the actual title. A nobleman appointed to attend to the king's bowel movements. He stood at the ready with linen cloth, warmed water, and, if necessary, gentle conversation. He knew the king's habits, moods, digestive rhythms. In many ways, he was the most intimate advisor in the kingdom. Imagine that. Your career path determined not by bravery or intellect, but by how well you handled another man's rectum. And yet, this position was powerful, because where the king's trousers dropped, secrets spilled. It was during these private, vulnerable moments that monarchs reveal their thoughts, fears, and strategies. Some say the real kingdom was ruled from the stool. And yet, for all their servants, silks, and sprays of rose water, royals suffered just like peasants. They got constipated. They got dysentery. They farted during council meetings. Some even died on the toilet. Yes, died. King George II of England dropped dead from a ruptured heart while straining on the commode. Elvis wasn't the first. But back to the Middle Ages. In castles, garderobes were often attached to the king's chamber, a narrow vertical shaft built into the wall, emptying into the moat or a pit far below. The smell? Ever present. The wind? Brutal. And sometimes, depending on the season, the waste froze. Which means yes, royal but's got frostbitten. And they didn't have ointment. They had prayers. But the myths persist. Even today, people imagine that kings wiped with silk. That queens never squatted. That palaces smelled of incense and honey, not ammonia and despair. But let me paint a more accurate picture. Imagine Queen Isabella, hem of her gown lifted, crouching over a wooden seat as her lady-in-waiting fans the air with a bundle of herbs. Imagine King Edward, pausing a military campaign because he's doubled over with cramps, forced to duck into a field while his knights politely turn their backs. Imagine a palace banquet ending in an urgent procession of nobles rushing to their private chamber pots, placed discreetly behind curtains, or not so discreetly beneath the table. Because royalty had bodies, and those bodies leaked, just like yours, just like mine, just like the peasant kneeling in the mud outside, praying not for bread, but for a moment alone to empty himself. And when it came time to clean the royal latrines, the gong farmer arrived, at night, torch in hand, bucket ready, and with every shovel of filth, he reminded the world of a truth no crown could deny. Even kings sit on holes. So the next time someone speaks of the majesty of medieval royalty, remember this. They ruled with a sword in one hand and a chamber pot in the other. The pit doesn't sleep. Even when the people do, even when the candles go out, when the monks snore in their cots, when the queen sighs softly in her lavender-stuffed pillow, the pit remains alive. Because waste in the Middle Ages is never still. It shifts, it ferments, it pulses, and eventually it moves. You first hear it at night, a delicate scraping, too rhythmic to be the wind, too soft to be human. It echoes up through the garderobe shaft, slides under the cracks in the floorboards, and sings a lullaby to your nerves. Then you see them, not all at once, never all at once, just one, a sleek, twitching nose, a flash of greasy fur, a pair of black, marble eyes blinking at you like twin punctuation marks at the end of a bad sentence. A rat. It watches, it waits, and then, like a curse you forgot to believe in, it vanishes back into the wall. But it's not alone. Where there is one rat, there are hundreds. The medieval world is theirs, not yours. You just live in it briefly. The rats crawl through the cesspits, the waste tunnels, the alleyways. They feast on human excrement, on spoiled grain, on bits of flesh discarded from the butcher's bench. They're in the kitchens, in the bedding, in the walls. And you're warm, you're soft, you're perfect. At night, they run across your feet. They chew holes in your boots. They nest inside the folds of your mattress. Some noble women woke to find rats nibbling their fingers. Some peasants never woke at all. But the rats are only the couriers. The true horror is smaller, invisible. Clinging to the rat's skin are tiny black specks, fleas, drunk with blood, bloated with disease. You don't notice the first bite. It feels like an itch, a scratch, a minor insult. But under your skin, the venom spreads. Not just of pestilence, but of history. Because this isn't just a flea. This is your Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. The moment your intestines finally catch up to destiny. It begins subtly. A headache, a fever, a tenderness in the armpit, beneath the jaw, then the swelling. Hot, purple, grotesque buboes growing like tumors where your lymph nodes once whispered in peace. They rupture. You scream. Your body becomes an exhibit of pain. You vomit black bile. You bleed from the nose. Your fingers darken. Your toes curl. You look down and realize your skin no longer feels like yours. And it all began in the toilet. Not directly, not dramatically, but through 1,000 casual moments of shared waste. Through the chamber pot that wasn't emptied. Through the flea that rode in on a rat that dined beneath the latrine. Disease in the Middle Ages is not an enemy. It is a roommate. It sleeps beside you, eats with you, leaves with you when you flee town, and follows you into the next. The rats go where people go, and the fleas follow the rats, and the plague follows the fleas. It is a dance, a choreography of decay, a silent waltz between filth and fate. In cities like Florence, like Paris, like London, people collapse in the streets. Men bury their wives, then their children, then themselves. Houses are boarded up. Priests walk door to door with carts, calling, "Bring out your dead." And still the garderobes overflow. The rats remain. The fleas multiply. The toilet, you realize, was never just a place to relieve yourself. It was the gateway, the warm, foul, echoing heart of the plague machine. Even the castles aren't safe. Queen Joan of Navarre dies screaming, her swollen body thrown into a pit alongside peasants and thieves. Doctors arrive in bird masks, leather beaks stuffed with lavender, as if perfume could unmake bacteria. It can't, but the belief lingers like the smell. So you wash your hands with vinegar. You light a sprig of sage. You pray, but nothing saves you, because the rats are in the walls, because the fleas have already jumped, because you flushed your dignity into a pit and it flushed something back. Beneath every great castle lies a secret. Not a treasure, not a tomb, but a swamp of memory. They don't put it on the tour. They don't paint it into the tapestries. But beneath the shining armor, beneath the carved stone halls, beneath the feet of kings and queens and warhorses, there is a cesspit, a gaping, stinking, pulsing pit of human waste. And it's been there for centuries. At first glance, it seems manageable. A simple hole beneath the garderobe, a shaft cut through the wall, elegant even in its brutal honesty. But castles are not temporary structures. They are monuments to stubbornness. And what is stubbornness if not letting your waste pile up for decades and pretending it isn't there? You walk through the Great Hall. You admire the tapestries. You marvel at the ceilings. You feel the cold stone beneath your boots and think how solid, how eternal. But it's a lie, because somewhere under your very feet is a lake of rot. It began as a trickle, a drop, a daily contribution from every noble backside. It fell into darkness, into silence. No one spoke of it until it grew. These pits were often dug beneath the floor of the latrine or the courtyard or the servants' quarters. Some were as large as banquet halls. Others ran deep into the earth, lined with stone, meant to last as long as the castle itself. They didn't. Over time, the waste fermented. Not poetically, not like wine, but violently. It created gas, methane, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, a cocktail of combustible despair. And there was no ventilation, no understanding of chemistry, just generations of excrement swelling under pressure, waiting for a spark. Sometimes that spark came from a torch, a careless servant, a soldier relieving himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes it was a lantern dropped by a gone farmer, his last breath swallowed in flame. And when it happened, it didn't whisper. It roared. The explosion was never small. The methane would ignite, and the entire pit would erupt, launching stone, waste, rats, and fire into the air. People died. There are records, sparse, embarrassed, hushed, of entire latrine towers collapsing, of garderobes crumbling into the moat, of noblemen being blown off the toilet mid-defecation, landing with broken ribs and a lifetime of trauma. Can you imagine? Dying on the toilet is tragic. But dying because the toilet exploded? That's biblical. Some say this is where the concept of hellfire began. Not beneath the earth, but inside it. A pit of flame and feces, where the sins of the flesh ignited into divine punishment. Of course, no one learned, because the pit was out of sight, until it wasn't. Sometimes the cesspits leaked, the stone gave way, the floor above cracked, and suddenly, a dining hall became a drowning hall. Entire feasts ended in screams as nobles were swallowed by the very filth they refused to acknowledge. The waste crept through the castle. It seeped into the kitchens. It rose through the stone. It spoke, a smell that couldn't be painted over, a presence that couldn't be banished, a truth that sat beneath every throne. You're standing on a bomb, and that bomb is made of you. Even now, centuries later, archaeologists uncover ancient castles and find the pits intact. Layers upon layers of compacted excrement, perfectly preserved, like the sediment of lost empires. They study it. They analyze the diet, the parasites, the health of the people who lived above it. But what they don't say is this: that cesspit is a mirror. It tells the real story, not of battles, not of kings, but of bodies, of habits, of everything the Middle Ages tried to flush away and couldn't, because nothing ever really leaves. It just waits, beneath the surface, breathing, heating, expanding, until one day, boom. Let's set the scene. You're standing in the heart of a medieval city. Let's say Paris, though it could just as well be London or Prague or Florence. The buildings lean inwards like old drunks whispering secrets. The air is thick, humid, and alive. Cobblestones glisten in the morning sun, not from dew, but from something far less poetic. You breathe in, instant regret. The smell hits you like a sermon you didn't ask for. It's not just bad, it's complicated. A bouquet of centuries, rotting vegetables, sour milk, burned tallow, human waste, horse urine, something vaguely corpse-adjacent, and a lingering hope that a breeze will carry it all away. It won't, because in the medieval city, the smell stays. It's not pollution, it's presence. You try to walk carefully, because the streets are not flat. They're concave, a deliberate design meant to channel liquid toward the center. Genius, perhaps, if only someone had also invented drainage. But no, the center of every street is a river of waste. Not metaphorical waste, not symbolic sin, actual human effluence, flowing gently between your feet like some kind of ironic baptism. You step wide, you hop, you fail. Your boot disappears into a puddle of something that is neither mud nor water, but history in its rawest form. It oozes into your socks. The stench climbs your leg. You are initiated. Welcome to civilization. Now let's talk logistics. Where does it all go? Nowhere. Chamber pots are dumped from windows. Buckets of urine hurled into the streets. The cry of Gardez Low becomes background noise. A French warning to the poor soul below. Mind the water. Water, in this case, meaning urine. Or worse, the richer homes had toilets, sometimes. But those, too, emptied into the streets or into cesspools beneath the house, which overflowed regularly. London in particular developed a unique scent, one described by foreign travelers as a moist cough you couldn't escape. Open sewers crisscrossed the city. Rivers once used for transport became drains. The Thames, wide and proud, slowly transformed into a dead vein, its banks crusted with excrement, its waters thick with bile. The locals adapted. They stopped drinking the water. They drank ale instead, not because they loved beer, though many did, but because it was boiled, safer than water, safer than life. And Paris? Oh, Paris, the city of light, long before electricity, of course, was a city of pits. Fosses deicences, they were called. Private cesspits beneath homes. When full, they would seep into the cellar, into the foundations, into your pantry. Sometimes the streets collapsed. Literally, the ground beneath would soften, and whole sections of roadway, houses, carts, people would sink into the mire, swallowed not by fire or famine, but by fermentation. And yet people thrived. Markets bustled. Churches rang their bells. Philosophers wrote about beauty and God, while rats ran beneath their feet, dragging cheese through puddles of human discharge. Perfume was invented, not for seduction, but for survival. You sprayed it not to attract, but to distract. The upper classes carried pomanders, orbs filled with herbs and spices, which they pressed to their noses while walking through the stinking arteries of the city. And the poor? They just endured. They had no silk scarves, no lavender sachets, only thick calluses and tired lungs. They swept the streets with brooms made of twigs. They poured lime into the gutters to neutralize the worst of it. But it never lasted, because waste accumulates faster than hope. Cities grew, but toilets did not. The people piled higher, lived closer, and died sooner. Children played in the alleys, feet bare, chasing dogs that licked the puddles. Women did laundry beside open drains. Bakers kneaded bread in shops that backed directly onto cesspools. And when disease came, as it always did, no one was surprised. The stench was a prophecy. So when you stand in the city square and someone smiles at you with 6 remaining teeth and offers you a piece of goat cheese wrapped in paper that smells like last Tuesday's sins, you take it. Because this is life, not the life of kings or myths or saints. The real life of a medieval city. Loud, filthy, glorious in its refusal to apologize. A city that feeds on itself, that sinks slowly, proudly, into its own reflection. Paris stinks. London sinks. And you? You just try to stay on the dry side of the street. Let's begin with a modern fantasy. You're in a dimly lit bathroom, soft music humming. You press a button. Warm water arcs like a divine blessing toward your exposed, deserving self. It's clean. It's efficient. It's borderline erotic. Congratulations. You're in the future. Now, smash that bidet with a rock. Throw the plumbing into a moat and replace the music with wheezing coughs and distant screams. Welcome back to the 14th century. There is no bidet. There is no gentle rinse. There is only pain. You're squatting in a field, or over a hole, or onto a wooden plank darkened by generations of regret. And once your body has done what it must, you face a question that never gets easier. Now what? Wiping, as we've already learned, is its own form of psychological warfare. But what about washing? Here's the truth. You don't. Not often. Not well. Not with soap. Not with trust. Let's talk about bathing, that long-lost art. In many medieval towns, public bathhouses did exist. A relic from Roman times, like plumbing's ghost. You could strip down and enter a steamy room filled with strangers, soap made from animal fat, and water that had seen too many bodies. Men and women often bathed together. Yes, together. It wasn't always sexual, but it was always suspicious. Eventually, the church began to frown on this naked mingling. Too much flesh, too much pleasure, too much water on skin not meant to be adored. Bathhouses were closed, or rebranded, or repurposed as places of prostitution, which, ironically, were cleaner than most kitchens. So people stopped bathing. Not entirely, but selectively. The rich washed their faces, their hands, their visible parts. Legs? Armpits? Genitals? Too intimate. You might be sprinkled with rose water before a feast, but your rear, unwashed, untouched, unspoken, There was no dedicated cleaning ritual after using the toilet. No rinsing, no splashing, no designated stream, not even a bowl. You wiped if you had the means. And then you moved on. Some people attempted their own versions of cleansing. Let's review a few, shall we? Cloth strips, dipped in vinegar or urine. Yes, urine was believed to have medicinal properties. Wiped gently, then hung to dry. Used again and again. Sponges, communal in nature, especially among the lower classes. One sponge per household. If it smelled particularly sharp, that was considered a sign of effectiveness. Bark or moss. If moist, it cleaned. If dry, it scratched. If crawling with bugs, it became your pet. But a proper rinsing? Forget it. Water itself was viewed with suspicion. People believed that opening your pores with a warm bath made you vulnerable to illness. A clean body was an open invitation to disease, a concept reinforced by centuries of plagues that followed every wet season. Doctors recommended dry cloth rubs or perfume, because if you smelled clean, maybe God would be fooled. And so, hygiene became performative. Layers of linen shirts, changed daily if you were rich, were used to absorb the dirt rather than clean it. The outer garments stayed immaculate. The body beneath? Less so. You may be wondering, what about women? Surely they had private rituals. Surely someone thought about vaginal hygiene, menstruation, postpartum cleaning? They did, but not kindly. Women were often accused of being closer to rot. Their bodies, bleeding, birthing, sweating, were seen as naturally impure. They were given rags, cold water, mistrust, and sometimes nothing at all. Midwives might use herbal infusions, but not every woman had access to such care. Instead, many suffered in silence, itchy, infected, inflamed. And to add insult to injury, people blamed them for being unclean, for getting sick, for smelling, not because they lacked access to water, but because they lacked virtue. The logic was simple. If you stink, it's your soul. So no, there was no bidet. There was no soft stream of warm water. There was shame. And maybe, if you were lucky, a cool bucket of rainwater stolen from a barrel before the pigs got to it. You'd splash. You'd wince. You'd dry off with something that used to be a curtain. And you'd be cleaner for a few minutes, until the privy called again, and the cycle resumed. Because in the Middle Ages, hygiene wasn't a right. It was a risk, and it was one most people didn't take. There's a moment, right after you sit, knees bent, feet cold, skin brushing with polished by centuries of trembling flesh, where the world seems to pause. A hush falls over your chest. You exhale. You let go. And then it begins. A gurgle. A hiss. A splash that feels far too loud. A sigh you didn't mean to make. Welcome to one of the most underrated humiliations of the medieval world. The sound of using the toilet. In modern life, we take for granted the dull roar of plumbing, the polite white noise of a fan, the whoosh of a flush, the safety of four walls and a lock. But in 1348, there is no mercy in acoustics. Every sound, every drop, every grunt, every ripple of gas escaping your traitorous body is amplified by stone, echoed by silence, and remembered by anyone within earshot. Let's begin with the structure. The medieval garderobe or privy is not acoustically engineered. It's not insulated. It's a hollow shaft built into a wall or above a pit, designed to funnel waste downward and sound upward. The hole beneath you acts like a mouth. Not yours, the earth's. And the earth is hungry for drama. You might be alone in the room, but the sound travels. Through the shaft, into the courtyard, through the castle hall, up through the vents, and into someone else's meal. If you're in a monastery, it's worse. There, toilets are lined up on a shared bench, a long, holy plank of communal suffering. Dozens of monks, robed and silent, crouched side by side. No partitions, no excuses, only God, watching with one eyebrow raised. You sit, and you try to hold it in. You try to release in stealth mode. You fail, because your body doesn't care about your vows of silence. It squeals. It plops. It whispers betrayal into the stone. And you see Brother Anselm flinch. He pretends he didn't hear, but he did. And now, so did you. The psychological tension is worse than the smell. You begin to notice everything. The creak of the seat beneath you, the echo of your own breath, the splash that tells you too much about yesterday's bread. And then comes the worst sound of all. Laughter. Not yours. Someone outside. Maybe children. Maybe servants. They heard you. And now your body has become comedy. Even royalty is not spared. In castle garderobes, a retainer might stand just outside the door, waiting to assist with wiping. They hear everything. They're trained not to react, but they're human. They wince. They cough. They remember, because sound is memory. And there are some things you never forget, like the high-pitched toot of a bishop who denied ever eating garlic, or the wet plop of a baron whose ego outweighed his colon, or the terrible, unmistakable silence before someone fainted and fell into the pit. It wasn't just noise. It was status. Because if you grunted too loud, you were undignified. If you moaned, you were weak. If you were too silent, people suspected witchcraft. Yes, even silence was suspicious. How could someone so still produce so much? Better to be loud and forgiven than quiet and cursed. In villages, outhouses were often shared. A wooden shack, a pit, a door that didn't close. The walls were thin. The night was long, and everyone knew what you were doing. Because they heard it. They smelled it. They lived with it. Even the animals participated. Pigs snorted nearby. Chickens pecked at what leaked under the door. Dogs waited for something warm to splash onto the dirt. It was a chorus, a nightly concert of bodily resignation. And when people died, as they often did, in bed, in childbirth, in fire, their toileting noises were often the last thing anyone heard from them. A groan aside, the gentle spill of something internal finally giving up. No one recorded it, but no one forgot it either. Because in the Middle Ages, death and digestion were often indistinguishable. Both were loud, both were final, and both left a smell behind. You finish your business, trembling, try not to make the final splash too dramatic. You wipe with something rough. You rise. You cough, pretending to disguise the sound. But someone hears. Someone always hears. And you walk back to your room, face flushed, legs stiff, hoping the stone forgets what it just echoed. It won't, because the sound of relief is followed, always by regret. You've done your duty. You stood, wiped, winced, and walked away, hoping the smell would forget you. But now, let's follow what you left behind. Because the medieval world has no plumbing, only gravity. And gravity doesn't believe in grace. Your contribution to history, that warm, soft relic of breakfast regret, drops into the dark and begins its journey through the hidden veins of the city. Welcome to the sewer, though calling it that is generous. There are no porcelain tunnels here, no smooth, engineered slopes, just gutters, ditches, and the occasional stone trench that's seen more exorcisms than repairs. If you're in a castle, your waste exits through a vertical shaft, sometimes called a garderobe chute. It's carved into the exterior wall, and from there, it plummets. Down past bricks, rats, and time, it lands, not quietly, into a pile or moat or open channel. This is the end of the road for royal waste. It collects. It seeps into the soil. It spreads. But in cities, the journey has only just begun. Let's say you live in London, near the Thames. Your toilet, more likely a chamber pot, is emptied out your window into the street where it joins the flow. It trickles down a cobbled alley. It joins other streams. Waste from kitchens, blood from butchers, spoiled milk, dead rats, the odd finger. All of it moving together like a parade of decay. Some cities had open sewers, narrow trenches along main roads, sometimes lined with stone, more often just carved dirt. They were called kennels in England, caniveaux in France. They overflowed every time it rained, which meant the filth didn't go away. It came up. Children played beside it. Women washed clothes near it. Animals drank from it. And people wondered why everyone was dying. In theory, the waste would find its way to the river. The great collector, the eternal recycler, the Thames, the Seine, the Arno. Ancient rivers turned bowls of soup, thick with bacteria and despair. Fish died, water blackened, froth formed on the surface like curdled guilt. But people still used it. They washed in it. They bathed in it. They drank it. Yes, they drank it. Because it was there. Because it was wet. Because it'll cost money. You pause here, stunned. How do they not know? How could they not see the connection between the sewer outside and the fever inside? But here's the thing. They did. They just couldn't do anything about it. There were no alternatives. No clean wells. No bottled water. No sanitation crews. Only superstition and trial by dysentery. Let's dive deeper. In larger cities, some advanced attempts at sewers existed. The Romans had left behind examples. Glorious underground channels, brick-lined, vaulted, still echoing with ancient intention. Medieval towns forgot how to use them, or chose not to, because maintaining underground systems requires cooperation, engineering, and trust. Three things the Middle Ages generally lacked. So the tunnels collapsed, the knowledge decayed, and the sewers became Dante's bonus circle, a limbo of liquid sins bubbling under every street. And what lived down there? You already know. Rats, worms, sometimes stray dogs, sometimes humans. The Gong farmers entered these tunnels by law at night, hauling buckets, scraping walls, crawling through waist-high sludge that whispered secrets about what the Lord ate last Tuesday. And sometimes it didn't return, because the gas built up, because the walls collapsed, because the weight of 1,000 forgotten bowel movements became too heavy to bear. In many cases, sewers served two directions. They were supposed to take waste away, but they also sent it back. During floods, waste surged through the streets. It backed up through garderobes. It gushed into homes. Imagine it, sleeping peacefully and waking to a torrent of sewage lapping at your feet. A baptism in brown. Families would climb to their attics, clutching candles, as the house filled with the past. No one came to clean it. You were the cleaning crew. And the next morning, you went back to cooking over the same hearth, pretending nothing had happened. Because in the medieval city, waste was a constant. Not a phase, not a mistake, a presence. It shaped your life. It entered your mouth. It informed your dreams. The city wasn't built above the sewer. The city was the sewer, just with walls. And you were part of the current. Let's begin with the lie. The fantasy you've heard 1,000 times in textbooks and travel documentaries. That the Romans were clean. That they bathed daily, drank from fountains, and sat upon marble toilets while debating Cicero over imported wine. That every citizen had access to aqueducts. That every street gleamed. That civilization, at its peak, smelled like citrus and sandalwood. It didn't. Not entirely. Not always. Because Rome was not one city. It was 1,000 contradictions piled on top of each other, and many of them reeked. Yes, the aqueducts were real. Yes, they carried clean water across mountains and valleys with a precision that would shame some modern cities. But who got that water? Not the poor. Not the slaves. not the alley dwellers packed into crumbling tenement blocks for stories high, 12 people per room, with no windows and a chamber pot shared by an entire family. They didn't bathe in mosaics. They bathed in whatever was left over, runoff from the rich or the nearest stagnant puddle after a storm. The famous thermae, those sprawling Roman bathhouses, were accessible, yes, even cheap, but cleanliness wasn't the point. They were social clubs, places of gossip, sex, business deals, and the occasional murder. And the water? Not filtered, not changed daily. A lukewarm broth of skin cells, perfumes, oils, and disease. The medical writers of the time knew this. Galen, Pliny, Celsus, they spoke cautiously about public bathing, noting that too much cleanliness could make you soft or sick. And what about the toilets? Ah, yes, the communal latrines. Stone seats, side by side, with round openings carved into benches that circled the room. Underneath, flowing water, not to flush, but to carry waste slowly downstream, ideally toward a sewer system like the Cloaca Maxima. Elegant? Sure. But private? Never. You sat elbow to elbow with strangers, dropped your toga, and did your business in full view. The echo of every splash rebounded off the marble like a civic announcement. And what did you use to wipe? Not cloth, not paper, a sponge on a stick, the tersorium. Soaked in vinegar or salt water, rinsed occasionally, and shared by everyone. No, not just your family. Everyone. There was a bucket nearby where the tersorium rested between uses like a forgotten relic of groupthink. You think medieval sanitation was primitive? The Romans wiped with a stick that dozens of strangers had also used that day, and then went out to lunch. But here's the real twist. Even this level of infrastructure, flawed, questionable, occasionally brilliant, didn't last. When Rome fell, its systems didn't gradually decay. They were ignored, misunderstood, and eventually feared. The aqueducts were abandoned. The baths were boarded up, seen as dens of heresy and lust. The sewers overflowed and were mistaken for entrances to hell. The Christianized medieval world didn't just lose Roman hygiene. It rejected it. Why? Because water became spiritual. Cleanliness was no longer about health. It was about sin. To wash too often was to indulge the flesh. To bathe for pleasure was to walk the edge of damnation. The body became dangerous. Its needs were suspect. Its functions a test. So Roman technology, even where it survived in stone, died in the mind. Medieval engineers couldn't repair the aqueducts. Not because they were dumb, but because they'd been taught not to care. To care about the body was to prioritize the world over the soul. And so, the tersorium turned to moss. The marble gave way to wood. The bathhouse became the brothel. And people lived closer to waste than ever before. Ironically, the memory of Rome grew cleaner the further it faded. Artists painted it in white stone and laurel crowns. Writers described gleaming streets and gleaming morals. We sanitized the past to escape the stink of the present. But Rome wasn't clean. It was just clever. And even that cleverness, shared sponges, public pits, perfumed baths, was a mask. A mask the Middle Ages ripped off, stomped on, and forgot. Until now. Until you. Sitting here in the 14th century, wiping with bark, squatting in a freezing pit, dreaming of an empire that never really loved you, and certainly never wiped for you. Let's talk about it. Not romantically, not delicately, not with lace and incense, and soft music playing in the background. Let's talk about what it meant to have a uterus in the Middle Ages. Because if using the toilet was bad for men, loud, shameful, unhygienic for women, it was a nightmare carved in flesh. You wake in the middle of the night. Your belly is cramping. You feel heat between your legs. You reach down, half asleep, and it has begun. Menstruation, a monthly inconvenience today, a monthly crisis in the 14th century. There are no tampons, no sanitary pads, no cups, no Midol, no heating pads. There is cloth, if you're lucky, a torn strip from an old shift, washed, reused, and stained with memories. But most of the time, there's moss. Hey, wool, even paper, whatever's dry, whatever's near, whatever fits between your thighs and doesn't fall out when you walk. Some women sew rags into undergarments. Others wedge materials between their legs, praying they don't shift as they carry water or kneel in church. Because if they leak, they are not pitted. They are judged. A stain on a woman's dress is not seen as biology. It is seen as filth, as failure, as evidence of her untrustworthy, bleeding body. The church teaches that menstruation is the mark of Eve's sin. That blood is impure. That a woman, while bleeding, should not touch holy relics, should not receive communion, should not sit on certain benches. Some even say she can wither crops or spoil wine just by walking too close. You are 16. You are bleeding. You're already guilty. And now you must clean yourself. Where? There is no bathroom. There is no private corner. There's only the field, the woods, the shared bench over the communal trench. And everyone knows. Everyone hears. So you wait. You wait until no one is near. Until the stars are high and the rats have had their fill. Then you creep into the dark with a rag clenched in your fist and shame tucked beneath your tunic. You squat. You clean. You cry. The cloth is stiff from previous use. It scratches. The moss is damp. It slips. The hay breaks. It leaves splinters. And the blood doesn't stop. You try to wash yourself with cold water from a basin. But the water has already been used for dishes, for laundry, for a dying uncle's feet. It doesn't cleanse. It only moves the blood around. You walk home with thighs chafing, linen soaked, stomach aching, and still you must tend to others. Children, goats, bread. You don't get rest. You don't get softness. You get through it. And then comes childbirth. Let's imagine that. You're in labor in a stone room with a dirt floor. No midwife today. She's tending to someone else. There are no painkillers. No sterilized tools. No doctor with a white coat. Just a neighbor whispering prayers. You squat on a stool, wood old and stained. You scream. You tear. You bleed. You pass a child into hands that are not gloved, not washed. And you hope you don't die from the bleeding, the infection, the afterbirth that won't stop. You hope your child lives. You hope you live. You hope no one hears the words bad blood and decides you're a witch. But the bleeding continues. Because postpartum bleeding, like menstruation, doesn't end when the baby is born. It lingers. It pours. And there is no support. No pads. No towels. Just more cloth. More moss. More prayers. You pack yourself with wool. You press your thighs together. You pray you don't collapse on the way to milk the cow. And through it all, there's the smell. Not perfume. Not roses. Iron. Rot. Blood. Sweat. The body doesn't lie. Your garments grow heavy. Your legs feel raw. Your back curves with exhaustion. And still, life demands your silence. Because to complain is weakness. To speak of blood is vulgar. To rest is laziness. So you endure. And if you are lucky, you live long enough to see your daughter repeated. And you hand her the same rag, the same wisdom, the same silence. Because that's what women pass down here. Not comfort, but coping. And if someone speaks of history, of great men, great wars, great ideas, you nod politely. And think of your rag, drying by the fire, stained with the part of history no one writes about. The privy, that humble wooden seat, that crooked hole in the floor, that shaft to somewhere below, was meant to offer release. Relief. Escape. maybe even a moment of quiet. But like all things in the Middle Ages, it came with a price. Sometimes that price was your pride, sometimes your hygiene, and occasionally, with brutal, ironic timing, your life. You've heard of dying on the battlefield, dying of plague, dying in childbirth. But what about dying while you relieve yourself? It happened, more than you'd like to believe. Let's start with one of the most infamous stories in medieval folklore. King Wenceslaus III of Bohemia, stabbed to death while on the privy. Not just stabbed, ambushed. He was sitting there, mid-act, surrounded by silence, when his enemies struck. Because here's the thing, when you're on a toilet, you're not wearing armor. You're not holding a sword. You're not even standing. You are vulnerable. You are exposed. You are half undressed, literally and symbolically. And enemies knew this. Privy assassinations became a strategy. Whispered through court corridors, planned with maps, executed with timing so cruel you could almost hear the toilet seat creak before the blade sank in. But most people didn't die by murder. They died by accident. Let's set the scene. You climb the winding stairs of a timber-framed house. 3rd floor, maybe 4th. Your chamber pot is full. The stench is unbearable. You decide to use the long drop, a shaft cut straight through the exterior wall, leading down into a cesspit or river below. There's a seat, sort of wooden, cracked, splintered, no railing, no backrest, no lantern. You pull up your skirts or drop your hose and lower yourself gently, praying the wind doesn't tilt your balance. Because there's nothing between you and the ground. No grid, no basin, just an opening. And sometimes people fell in, not children, adults. They slipped, they fainted, they leaned too far. The board broke, and suddenly they were no longer perched, they were plummeting into the pit. And the pit was not empty. Imagine it, 10 feet of waste, old waste, wet waste, thick waste, the kind that doesn't splash. It absorbs. You land. You sink. You inhale once, a fatal mistake. And then the weight of it presses in from every side. There is no rescue. It would jump in after you. Even if someone heard you scream, it would be too late. The air is toxic. The surface is slick. The ladder, if there is one, is covered in grease, slime, and despair. And if you try to climb, something gives way. You slide back down deeper. Some are found the next morning, face down, half submerged, hands clawed into the muck, as if they tried to pull the night back into their lungs. Others were never found at all, because cesspits were sometimes sealed, built not for cleaning, but for containing. A family might cover it with a lid once it reached a certain height and dig a new one nearby. And if you were unlucky enough to fall in right before sealing, you became part of the earth, part of the stink, part of the forgotten. Even gong farmers, those poor souls hired to clean out these pits, sometimes died on the job. The methane was invisible, odorless in lethal doses. 1 minute, you're shoveling sludge. The next, you've inhaled too deeply and passed out into the very thing you were hired to remove. Some suffocated, others drowned. Many were simply never seen again. And the irony? No one mourns a death like that. You don't get a eulogy if you die in a cesspit. You don't get buried with your family. You don't get a gravestone that says, "Beloved son, died while pooping." No, you get erased. And so, these deaths became whispers, passed down as warnings, told to children in hushed tones. Don't lean too far. Don't rush. Don't go alone. Because the privy was not a toilet. It was a trapdoor. And sometimes it opened. The first thing you notice isn't the cold. It isn't the lice. It isn't even the hunger. It's the smell. It clings to your linen. It curls into your shoes. It follows you like guilt. And you carry it into every chapel, every market, every marital bed. Medieval Europe didn't smell bad. It smelled worse. Because it didn't just smell like sweat and sewage, it smelled like fear. Fear of rot, fear of sickness, fear that the wrong odor might be more than impolite. It might be fatal. You see, in a world without microbiology, people believed that disease was spread through miasma, bad air, foul vapors, corrupted breezes that entered through the nose and poisoned the body from the inside out. If you wanted to live, you had to fight smell with smell. So you arm yourself, not with science, but with flowers, spices, vinegar, and ritual. You begin with your clothes. Your outer garments, often made of wool, rarely washed, are brushed, not laundered. To cleanse them, you hang them over rosemary bushes. You stuff dried lavender into the folds. You rub cloves into the seams. Your cloak smells like an herb garden that's given up on healing. And then there's your neck, your wrists, your hands. You wear scented gloves, soaked in civet or ambergris, oils extracted from glands of beasts you've never seen alive. These gloves are your armor. You bring them to your nose when a beggar walks by, or when the breeze changes near the fish market. Sometimes you simply hold a posy, a tiny bouquet of sweet-smelling herbs, thyme, rue mint, marjoram. In cities during plague time, everyone carries one. Men, women, children. You see them in illustrations. Wide eyes, stiff collars, and flowers pressed to their faces like they're trying to hide their own souls from what the air knows. Perfume isn't luxury. It's medicine. You walk through the market and pass a perfumer's stall, a rich man's chemist, selling concoctions made with frankincense, myrrh, sandalwood, rosewater, musk. The bottles are tiny. The price is absurd. And still people buy, because if they smell good, they believe they are safe. The rich take it further. They scent their bed linens. They sprinkle floors with herbs. They burn juniper in their hearths and believe the smoke purifies the room. Some even keep pomanders, metal balls filled with perfumes, hung from belts or rosaries, swinging gently like incense on a priest's chain. They open them in crowds, in sick rooms, in church, anywhere the body threatens to betray itself. But here's the truth. It doesn't work. Not really, because stench wins. The streets are lined with dung. The corners hide buckets of waste. Chamber pots fly from windows. Privies overflow. The baker stinks. The midwife stinks. The bishop stinks. Even the queen stinks. Her gowns are never fully clean. Her undergarments, if she wears any, are washed by servants who've already soaked 20 others in the same murky basin. But she dabs her wrists with rose oil, and the illusion holds, just long enough for dinner. There's a famous tale of Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, not medieval, but close, who commissioned a tonic of rosemary and wine meant to preserve beauty and health. The Hungary water became legendary. People believed it cured everything from plague to heartbreak, but mostly it masked rot, because the body was always rotting slowly from the inside out. Your teeth were black. Your gums bled. Your armpits itched with lice and the cloying reminder that water was rare and soap was laced with animal fat and ashes. Baths, if you took them, were shared. Multiple strangers in the same tub, water cloudy by the third dip. Public bathhouses became brothels. The church declared them sinful. So you stopped bathing and you started masking. The smell didn't go away. It became part of the world. A background note, a constant, like wind or guilt. Some tried stronger methods. Washing the mouth with vinegar, chewing parsley to freshen breath, carrying lemon slices in one's mouth during illness. But nothing stopped the odor of a body trying to survive. Because medieval life wasn't clean. It wasn't perfumed. It wasn't sanitized. It was an ongoing battle between what you are and what you pretend to be. And you fight with every lavender sachet, every clove-stuffed glove, every flower crushed into your palm as you kneel in prayer, whispering through the scent. Please, not me. Not today. Let's be honest. You've laughed at a fart. You've giggled when someone slipped a little too dramatically in a public restroom. You've smirked at a joke about flatulence, constipation, or the sudden panic of not finding a toilet on time. You're not alone. So did they. Because while medieval life was brutal, grotesque, and often fatal, it was also hilarious, especially when it came to what the body did when no one wanted it to. Or worse, when everyone could hear it. Let's begin with the church, the holiest of places, a stone echo chamber of incense, chant, and suffering, where a monk once farted so loudly during Vespers that his brothers broke into tears, not from reverence, but from uncontrollable laughter. The tale was written down, repeated, exaggerated. He became a minor celebrity, a cloistered flatulist, hailed for breaking the silence in the most biblically human way imaginable. And while the abbots scowled, the people laughed, because beneath the robes, even monks had bowels. And sometimes, God's greatest joke was timed perfectly between two lines of Latin. Farting wasn't just a sin of the body, it was a weapon of joy. Jesters used it freely. Their job was to remind kings that death stank, that war stank, that even the throne had a toilet built beneath it. They mimed pooping. They burped on cue. They told stories of lords who fell into latrines while drunk and woke up in the arms of pig. And the nobles roared with laughter, because humor, then as now, was power. It reclaimed the shame. It defanged the horror. It turned the groaning of the bowels into music. The peasantry had their own traditions. Folk songs about exploding chamber pots. Rhymes about witches who cursed men with constipation. Mimes at village fairs who'd pretend to relieve themselves on stage, only to produce a turnip from beneath their cloak. Even the great literary minds weren't above it. Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales, wrote of a man who farts so violently that it echoes through a church. Rabelais, in Gargantua and Pantagruel, filled entire chapters with creative defecation. And in The Miller's Tale, a man kisses a bare bottom through a window, mistaking it for a woman's face, until the next one farts in his eye. Yes, this is literature, because they knew what we know. The toilet is the last stage of democracy. Every bishop squats. Every knight strains. Every princess prays for fiber. And pretending otherwise? That was the real joke. But it wasn't always gentle. Toilet humor was also punishment. In public executions, jesters would mock the condemned by miming their last poop. Crowds would chant rude rhymes about how a man shat out his sins before the noose. And if a person was known to have died on the toilet, well, they'd never live it down, even in death. Take the tale of King Edmund Ironside, rumored to have been killed while using a chamber pot, stabbed from beneath through a hole in the latrine. The assassin's blade struck true, but history struck harder. Centuries later, he's still remembered as the king who died crapping, because medieval humor was merciless and unforgettable. But beneath the mockery was something tender, a shared understanding, a nod across centuries. Yes, we all stink. Yes, we all fall. Yes, the body betrays us, and still we laugh. Because that's how you survive a world like this. You grab your ribs, you ease through the smell, and you laugh. Not because it's clean, but because it's true. So the next time you flush and walk away, think of the monk, of the jester, of the peasant who cracked jokes with moss stuffed between his legs. And be grateful, not just for the plumbing, but for the permission to laugh in the dark. Congratulations. You've been knighted, anointed, and crowned. You're now royalty. And what's the first thing you must do? You must poop. Not metaphorically, not diplomatically, physically, because monarchs, for all their divine right and golden robes, still had intestines. And those intestines gurgled, and twisted, and whispered ancient truths in a language no crown could silence. So they sat upon thrones that were, in fact, toilets, not figuratively, literally. You see, the word throne wasn't always symbolic. In many royal chambers, especially in castles across England, France, and the German principalities, there existed a chair, often carved of wood or stone, draped in velvet, with a hole cut in the center. Beneath it, a shaft, or a bucket, or a servant, sometimes all three, because royalty didn't wipe themselves. That was a job, a profession, a career path. In the English court, it had a name, the groom of the stool. Let that sink in. A man, educated, well-dressed, often of noble birth, whose primary duty was to attend to the king during his most vulnerable moments. He stood by during defecation. He fetched cloth. He disposed of waste. He, yes, wiped. But here's the twist. It wasn't humiliating. It was an honor. Because in that moment, while the king grunted and exhaled, the groom was closer than any advisor, any knight, any priest. He heard secrets. He learned moods. He read the royal body like a scroll of scripture. Grooms of the stool became powerful, trusted, rich, and when a king died, they were among the few allowed in the chamber to prepare his body. After all, they'd handled his most private matters in life. Why stop at death? Queens had no equivalent, at least not officially, but royal ladies had attendants, women who assisted with everything from dressing to bleeding to birthing to bathing. And yes, toileting. Behind embroidered screens, in gilded commodes, they lifted royal skirts, adjusted posture, and scrubbed with cloths soaked in rosewater. But make no mistake, the smell was there. Always. Even in Versailles, the palace of mirrors and chandeliers. The stink of urine wafted through galleries, curled beneath perfume, and soaked into the walls. There were over 1,000 residents at any given time, but very few privies. So people used the stairs, the hallways, the fireplaces. They relieved themselves behind curtains and inside ornamental pots, sometimes in the garden, sometimes on the garden statues. Servants dumped the chamber pots into ditches. Those ditches fed into larger cesspits. Those pits festered beneath the marble. And all the while music played. Fountains trickled. Paintings smiled. Because court life was about illusion. You dined on gold. You dressed in lace. You smelled of musk and civet. But you still sat. You still strained. And when the stool arrived, carved, velvet, majestic, you mounted it like a king and prayed for smooth passage. Some monarchs took their digestive health seriously. Louis XIV of France held morning audiences while seated on his toilet. Literally, courtiers entered the room, bowed, and discussed politics while the king defecated behind a lace screen. And if you made him laugh, he might fart in approval. Others were more discreet. Queen Elizabeth I had a traveling commode, a portable, upholstered box fitted with a chamber pot and carried by servants. When she traveled, it came with her. Always. Because even the virgin queen had bowels. But what if the royal bowels failed? Then came the doctors. Physicians examined the king's excrement like priests reading entrails. They judged its color, its consistency, its frequency. A good day, firm, brown, easy. A bad day, loose, pale, or, heaven forbid, green. Some kings were so constipated, they had enemas administered by candlelight. Herbal purges, boiled syrups, even leeches to the rectum in desperate times. And if things went well, if the king passed a respectable stool, you might smile, you might sigh, and someone would wipe. So next time you flush, take a moment. You're not just evacuating. You're performing a ritual once reserved for royalty. But unlike them, you wipe yourself. You have privacy. You have plumbing. and no one's writing poems about your poop. Yet, the body stirs. It groans in your belly. It cramps behind your ribs. It bubbles at midnight and coils into your spine. And you whisper, "Who did this to me?" Because it can't be the meat you left in the sun, or the mold on your bread, or the water from the stream where animals rot just upstream. No, this is intentional. Someone made your bowels rebel, and you already know her name. She lives at the edge of town. She walks barefoot. She doesn't bow her head when the priest passes by. She talks to herbs, to cats, to herself. And last week, after you mocked her child, you came home and couldn't stop shitting blood. Coincidence? You think not. In medieval Europe, the line between sickness and sorcery was as thin as a bowel wall. When a body betrayed you, you assumed it had been cursed. Witchcraft wasn't about thunder or fire. It was about digestion. Witches cursed your gut. They made you vomit, made you bloat, made your child soil himself until he shriveled like an apple left too long in the cellar. You see, the gut was the seed of life and death. It processed the world, and when it failed, the world fell apart. Doctors tried herbs. Priests offered prayers. But if neither worked, they brought out the accusers. I saw her pick mushrooms from the cemetery. She whispered over a pot of mint and valerian. She stared at my stomach during Mass. That was enough. The church feared the belly more than the devil. Because what good is salvation if your intestines explode in church? So women were burned, not just for charms or love potions, but for causing diarrhea. Yes, truly, in inquisitorial records from the 15th century, there are testimonies where men claimed they had been afflicted in the bowels after an argument with a woman, and it held up in court. Imagine that. The pain in your stomach becomes a death sentence for someone else. And not just strangers. Midwives, herbalists, widows, women who knew what fennel did to the gut, or how to ease childbirth with crushed mint and honey. They were the most at risk. Because if your remedies worked, you were a threat to the church's monopoly on suffering. And if they failed, you were a witch. It was a no-win game, played in outhouses, kitchens, and fields. There's one record from Switzerland in 1485 of a woman named Bridget. She was called to a house where a man's bowels had stopped moving for 3 days. She gave him an enema of warm milk and sage. The next day, he vomited worms. The town said she'd put them there. They burned her by the river, and her ashes mixed with the very waste she tried to heal. The symbolism was perfect, because women, especially poor, rural, aging women, were seen as custodians of filth. They bled. They wiped children. They buried animals. They dug pits. And the closer you were to waste, the closer you were to evil. So the toilet wasn't just a place of relief. It was a place of suspicion. If you went too often, you were cursed. If you went too little, you were cursed. If your stool smelled different, changed color, moved with too much force or too little grace, someone had interfered. The result? An entire gender became suspect, because the female body was already a mystery. It bled without wounding. It stretched and shrank. It fed life and expelled death. So when the gut howled, when your stomach rebelled at dusk, you didn't ask for a doctor. You asked for the firewood. They say witches rode broomsticks, but some believe they flew not to the Sabbath, but to avoid the privy altogether, because beneath that rickety board in the dark pit below, they knew they were being watched, not by the devil, but by men with torches and questions and ropes, and all it took was one cramp, one sour belch, one sleepless night of groaning, to end a life in smoke. There are too many bodies, too many to bless, too many to name, too many to mourn, and not enough space to bury them. The year is 1348. You're standing at the edge of a village that no longer speaks, because no one is left to speak. Chickens wander through empty streets. The bell in the chapel hasn't rung in 3 days. And in the wind, you can hear the soft groaning of floorboards beneath corpses left where they fell. The Black Death has arrived, and it does not knock. It tears the door off the hinges, climbs into your lungs, boils beneath your skin, and then steals your breath before the hourglass even tips twice. You were told it came from the east, from rats, from sin, from God. But what you know is this: you're alone, and the bodies are piling up. At first, you dig graves. You do it gently. You wrap your brother in his blanket. You cross your mother's arms. You whisper a prayer. But then come the 3rd, the 7th, the 12th. Your hands shake. Your back aches. The ground hardens with frost. And so you stop digging and start dumping into pits, into ravines, and eventually into the cesspools. Yes, you begin using the privies. Because they're deep. Because they're already foul. Because they're already places no one visits unless they must. And so the line between waste and remains dissolves. Some bodies are whole. Some are curled in final prayer. Some are barely bones wrapped in a shroud of yesterday's fever. And you drop them, not out of cruelty, but because you have no choice. The plague doesn't wait. The carts don't stop. And the flies have learned to gather early. Cesspits, once sites of daily misery, become mass graves. Not officially, not declared, but in practice, because they're already holes. And holes are what death needs most. In the city, it's worse. London, Paris, Florence. The population collapses. The gravediggers die. The priests die. The doctors die. And in the corners of alleyways, you'll find makeshift seats, latrines so full of vomit, blood, and human waste that it's hard to tell who sat there and who died there. Bodies fall where they squat. Some slump forward into the filth. Others are discovered upright, eyes open, mouths agape, like statues carved in panic. And no one dares move them, because to touch is to risk infection. To breathe is to gamble with fate. So the latrine becomes a liminal space, a borderland, where life was meant to release itself and ends up collapsing into death. There are accounts, rare, desperate scribblings, of entire plague houses whose waste pits became tombs, the dead stacked like logs in privy shafts, covered with lime, then with silence, until even memory rots, and later, when the plague ebbs, when the living return to clean, to rebuild, to pretend, they open those pits and find more than bones. They find rings still clinging to fingers. They find teeth marks in wood. They find faces turned upward, as if death came suddenly, mid-sentence. And always the stench remains. Years later, decades later, the pit has absorbed more than waste. It has swallowed history. And beneath the floorboards of alehouses, beneath gardens that bloom too lush, archaeologists today still find them. These cesspits turn catacombs. Lined with latrine bricks, yes, but filled with our ancestors. Not kings, not saints, but bakers, mothers, children still holding their toys. Because the plague didn't discriminate. And when the body failed, when the soul fled, it mattered not whether you died in bed or on a privy seat. Eventually, the only thing left was a hole in the ground. They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes it's buried by the defeated, in pits no one dares to open, beneath layers of soil, shame, and silence. And in those ancient cesspools, the stink of humanity still lingers, as if whispering, "We were here, we suffered, we decayed, just like you." It begins like all good medieval stories with a knock at the door. You're a servant. It's 3 a.m. The chamber is dark, save for the glimmer of moonlight on the brocade drapes. And someone has shat the bed. Again. But it's not your fault. It's your job. You tiptoe in with a cloth over your mouth. You lift the velvet skirts of the bed, find the porcelain pot, and pray it isn't overflowing. Sometimes it is. Because the Lord drank too much mead. Because the lady is pregnant. Because the child was scared and thought it was a piss jar. So you carry the pot, sloshing, lukewarm, humming with flies, down 3 flights of stairs to the courtyard, where you pour it into a trench, or out a window, or over a wall, and it splashes on the boots of a passing merchant, who curses you in 3 languages and spits in your general direction. Welcome to the politics of chamber pots. These weren't just tools of convenience. They were instruments of class warfare. The higher you were in status, the closer your pot. The lower you were, the more distance between you and your own bowels. Let's break it down. Nobles had bedchambers, with servants on call to clean, empty, and refill pots multiple times a day. They had scented cloths, ash basins, even perfumed paper, if they were lucky and rich enough to import it. They never touched their own waste, never carried their own pot, never even acknowledged what happened beneath the layers of silk and lace. Their chamber pots were often decorated. Yes, painted, gilded, sometimes even inscribed. Imagine pooping into a porcelain bowl with a Latin proverb around the rim. Fortuna rota volvatur, the wheel of fortune turns. Indeed it does. Meanwhile, the middle class had their own pots, less glamorous, more ceramic, prone to cracking in the frost. They shared them. Mother, father, children. 1 pot for 5 people. No servants to carry it. Just a strong stomach and a quick hand. And the poor? The poor had walls, alleyways, ditches, sometimes just a blanket to squat on. They shat in buckets, in corners, into holes they dug themselves, and sometimes didn't. And the street became a bathroom. In cities like London, Paris, or Prague, cries of Gardes Low, watch the water, echoed through the night as chambermaids flung buckets of waste from windows above. The phrase eventually gave us the word loo, a polite nod to a past where human feces fell from the sky like divine punishment. But it wasn't just about where you pooped. It was how you were treated for it. A noble could soil himself at a feast and be gently escorted out by 10 discreet servants. A beggar who did the same would be whipped, or jailed, or pelted with dung by angry townsfolk. Poop became proof of power, and nowhere was this more visible than in courts of etiquette. In Versailles, a noblewoman could step out of the ballroom, lift her skirts, and relieve herself behind a curtain mid-conversation. Because there were no toilets, only screens, and status. But the maid who cleaned that spot, she'd be punished if she took too long, or if she left a smell, or if she dared to relieve herself without permission. This extended into punishment itself. Some debtors were forced to carry chamber pots through the streets as public shame. A noble once ordered his footman to wear a chamber pot on his head after a mishap during dinner. And in brothels, there were entire rooms, yes, entire rooms, devoted to chamber pot kinks. Because for some, power wasn't real unless someone else was kneeling with a cloth. Even during war, the chamber pot held weight. Napoleon's personal pot traveled with him on campaign, engraved with his family crest. Soldiers carried smaller, tin ones on horseback. But the peasants? They sat behind hedges. The message was clear. The closer you were to a clean, private pot, the closer you were to control. So next time you use your private bathroom, close the door and flush the toilet with a button. Know this. You're living a life once reserved for kings. And it was fought for, not just with swords or ink, but with shit. Literal, steaming, class-defining shit. And every chamber pot cleaned, every trench dug, every window shout of watch out below was a cry for dignity. Not just to empty the body, but to be allowed to do so without shame. Congratulations. You've just been hired to design a medieval castle. Your patron is a duke, or a baron, or perhaps a very nervous king who suspects the neighbors might invade soon. He wants strong walls. He wants towers tall enough to see across 3 counties. He wants a great hall, a drawbridge, a moat. And, of course, he wants somewhere to shit. You, the architect, know this. You've designed castles before. You know that before the stones are laid, before the timber is hauled, before the stonemasons even clear their throats, you must answer one question. Where'll the poop go? Because if you build a fortress without a place to relieve yourself, it's not a castle. It's a tomb. Let's begin with the garderobe. That's the polite term. It means wardrobe, because clothes were sometimes hung inside, the smell supposedly repelling moths. Yes, really. But what it really means is the castle's toilet chute. A narrow, stone shaft that juts out from the wall, like an architectural afterthought. Sometimes it's tucked into a turret. Sometimes it's cleverly disguised in a recess. But always it leads downward, directly downward, with a modest seat and a terrifying drop. You perch there. In winter, your ass freezes against the stone. In summer, the flies kiss your thighs like unwanted suitors. And beneath you, nothing but air and gravity. The waste falls from the chute into a pit, or a moat, or the open fields. And if the wind is wrong, it doesn't fall. It floats back up. Many a noble had their dignity shattered by a gust of wind and the wrong kind of splashback. But the garderobe isn't just functional. It's strategic. Architects place them near exterior walls because they can't be cleaned from the inside. If the castle's under siege and the chute clogs, you don't want to shovel it from the Great Hall. Some castles had double garderobes, 2 holes side by side, for marital bonding or unfortunate timing. Some had secret garderobes built into hidden chambers, not for privacy, but for escape. Because if you needed to flee during a siege, you could climb down the shit chute and into the moat. Yes, some noblemen escaped through their own waste. Tell that to anyone who thinks medieval warfare was glorious. But that's not all, because the placement of garderobes had to consider airflow. Too close to the kitchens, your stew smells like latrine. Too close to the chapel, you offend God. Too close to the dormitories, well, let's just say it's hard to sleep when someone upstairs is passing judgment. So architects became poop engineers. They studied wind, angle, distance, drainage. They experimented with slope and depth. And they failed. A lot. There's a story from the 13th century about a castle in Germany where the garderobe was built directly over a rocky ledge. The waste didn't drop. It splattered onto the rocks, then down the castle walls, where it pooled, right next to the entrance. Visitors had to step around it. Servants slipped in it. The moat turned green, and eventually, the castle was abandoned. Not by sword, but by sewage. That's how important these decisions were. In some cases, the garderobe tower was the first part of the castle built, a vertical spine from which the rest of the fortress unfolded. But why not build indoor toilets, you ask? Because flush toilets didn't exist. Water was scarce. Pipes were primitive. And the idea of containing waste indoors was disgusting. No, you needed it to leave, to vanish, to never be seen again. And yet, despite all this effort, castles stank. Always. The garderobes leaked. The pits overflowed. The moats turned black. During sieges, the waste couldn't be removed. It built up. It fermented. And in some cases, the enemy didn't need to breach the walls. The smell alone drove defenders mad. There are even reports of dung catapults, defenders hurling buckets of excrement over the walls to repel attackers. It was war. It was waste. It was efficient. Today, tourists walk through castles in awe. They marvel at the towers, the arches, the stained glass. But few notice the small stone recess in the corner. That, dear listener, is where a duke once squatted. where a queen once sighed in cold misery, where the architect of a fortress said, "This is where the real business happens." Because before there were castles of stone, there were castles of shit, and every throne, even the ones without velvet, was sacred in its own way. And so, we flush. You made it through the mud, through the moats, through the fumble walls of medieval latrines and the class warfare of chamber pots. You've seen peasants dig, kings squat, and nobles perfume their piss. And now, as you sit, maybe cross-legged in bed, maybe curled beneath a blanket, let's ask the question history never dares to answer. What if civilization wasn't built on law or language, but on the toilet? Because here's the truth. The moment humans settled, when we stopped chasing deer and started planting wheat, we created waste. And once we made waste, we had to hide it. That's where everything begins. You could draw a map of empire through sewage. Ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, had clay pipes and drainage channels. The Indus Valley, flushing toilets before the pyramids even dreamed of existing. The Romans, obsessive. Aqueducts, latrines, sponge-on-a-stick hygiene. And when those empires fell, so did sanitation. The Middle Ages didn't just lose literacy. They lost plumbing. They lost privacy. They lost the flush. And the streets reeked. Imagine the smell of regression, of theology replacing engineering, of rot replacing rhythm. Even progress was measured in pipes. London in the 19th century nearly drowned in its own filth. The great stink of 1858 forced Parliament to flee the city. Only then did they build modern sewers. Not because of morality, not because of compassion, but because the smell was unbearable. History moves forward when it can't stand the stink anymore. And today, you, dear listener, live in an era of miracles. You sit on a porcelain altar. You press a button, and the past, all of it, vanishes with a hiss. But even now, the politics remain. 2 billion people still don't have access to safe toilets. Women in rural areas walk miles at night, not for food, not for firewood, but to relieve themselves without shame. Children die not from bullets, but from bacteria in stagnant water. Governments fall from cholera outbreaks. Entire cities are reshaped after each flush. Because waste management is not just about comfort. It's about dignity. It's about power. It's about who matters enough to be clean. And yet, we still hide it. We call it the restroom. We spray lavender over our shame. We pretend we don't carry our ancestors in our intestines. But deep down, every empire, every church, every palace was held together not by faith or stone or gold, but by where the shit went. So tonight, as you drift to sleep, spare a thought for the nameless ones. The boys who emptied the chamber pots, the women who dug the pits, the architects who carved holes in castle walls so that their lords could relieve themselves in peace. They were the true civil engineers. They made cities livable. They made history flushable. And maybe, just maybe, they made the world a little more bearable. You may rest now. You've walked through the dirtiest corridors of history. You've survived the stink, the splash, and the superstition. You've seen humanity at its most human. And now, in the quiet hum of modern plumbing, beneath clean sheets and soft lamplight, you're free to let go. Because the past, for tonight, has been flushed away